Okay, I think we've kind of leveled out as far as new attendees joining, so we will go ahead and get started with introductions. Again, this is the evolution of the Integration Pilot Program, or IPP. I am Tracee Freese. I am the Director of Communication for the National Institute for Aviation Research at Wichita State University. I've also had the honor of working with the Kansas Department of Transportation's Division of Aviation and Mr. Bob Brock, one of our panelists here, as one of the partners for the Kansas IPP program. So that being said, we'll go ahead and start with Bob.
Well, good morning. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to visit today. I think it's an interesting and exciting time to be part of all this conversation. Kansas is one of the LPs, as is fairly well known, and we enjoy partnering with a number, about 34 mission partners across the country. And right now, as we step into phase 2 of IPP, it's a good time to share lessons learned and give conversation to and answer questions about what's it look like in phase 1 and what's phase 2 going to look like. So I'm a Kansas kid, was an Air Force pilot for 22 years and retired and came back home to Kansas to be the Director of Aviation.
And we also have Wes Schover with Flytrex.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from here in North Carolina. I'm Wes Schover, Head of U.S. Operations for Flytrex. We are a full solution for drone delivery operations. We manufacture the aircraft, the software, and also bring customer support. We're currently participating in the North Carolina IPP, the North Dakota IPP, and most recently the Kansas IPP. We also are very excited to share our experience about the IPP and also our forward-looking hope for the future of the IPP and the integration into the NAS with drone delivery.
And Trevor Woods.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Trevor Woods. I'm with the Northern Plains UAS test site up in North Dakota. And we're not necessarily the lead agency for North Dakota, but we are, the primary supporting agency that's supporting the North Dakota Department of Transportation for our integration pilot program. And similar to Kansas, we've got, about 35 partners on our integration pilot program that we're managing as well. And yeah, so thanks for allowing me to be on the panel.
And Carrie Cannon with Bell just joined us. Carrie, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Carrie Cannon. I'm the Chief Engineer of Innovation at Bell. And, I'm happy to be on this panel. The IPP, we're a user of the IPP. And I think that gives us a great perspective on where it's helped us, how we've accelerated some things. So I'm excited to be on the panel. Thank you.
Great. We'll go ahead and get started with our first question. And we'd like to know, what does the IPP program produce that you believe is the most significant? We'll go ahead and start with you, Trevor.
That's a good question. In my opinion, I think, I looked 3 years ago, and like Bob said, we're kind of coming to the end of the program here that we know it today, and we're going to end here officially October 25th. And we look back 3 years ago, and we're a heavy contributor to our proposal in North Dakota as far as, why we should become an integration pilot program. And one of the things that really stuck out was there was no new regulations. There was really going to be no provisions outside of existing regulatory approvals that were going to be given to any of these lead teams that would be nominated. And at that time, we were putting the proposal together, this package delivery concept was just an idea, and obviously a lot of interest from industry, but we sat there saying there's no way the FAA is going to allow this to happen because there's no provisions in the regulations to allow it. And so funny, in North Dakota, we're well, we're not even going to touch that because we know there's no new regulations, and so it's never going to be a thing. And if you even propose that, you're probably just going to get cut. You're not even going to get any consideration from the FAA. And how naive of us, we focused in other areas that were more of our strengths with beyond visual line of sight and flight over people. So that being said, we really didn't get into the package delivery space too much, but looking at the broad scope of the team of all 9 IPPs, I think one of the big achievements we have seen out of this program is the ability to get to package delivery. And maybe it's not where we want it officially, like today. We want to see, of course, further along, but we have made great strides as an industry and as a team, the finding the ways through Part 135 and getting the type certification process really moving forward. It's always been a thing for the past 10 years, but we really saw a lot of momentum get built upon the Aircraft Certification Office with the FAA through the participants of this IPP program with folks such as Wes with Flytrek. So that would be my opinion of one of the biggest achievements out of this particular program.
Tracee, I can piggyback on that. For us as well, we did start package delivery in North Dakota, not as part of the IPP. One of the things that the IPP did for us is to see the pathway, what we could do today under the provisions of 107, but really how do we get to the next level? And starting those operations in North Dakota at the golf course, we started at Kings Walk working with the town of Grand Forks. It really jump-started our work in the IPP in North Carolina because we could start fleshing out the challenges that we're going to see with the visual line of sight rule, the observer people rule, and also help kickstart the engagement with the FAA to say, look, there are opportunities to do package delivery, albeit very, very challenging because of the visual line of sight rule and the type certification requirement for BVLOS and 135. So really, we leveraged what we learned in North Dakota to bring it down to North Carolina and to share with the FAA, okay, here's what we can currently do, but help us find pathways to advancing this. Whether it's working through the waiver process for like an observer people waiver, so we don't have to worry about if there's people walking underneath the drone to capture the package. And also starting to talk about the Part 135 process. How do we look at economic authority? How do we find an air carrier that can blend what they know in manned aviation and bring it over to conversations with the FAA for unmanned? And so, yeah, the biggest thing for us was starting with the framework of 107 and moving forward through the type certification process with our aircraft, and also looking at the Part 135 package with our air carrier, Causey Aviation.
We had a very different experience, Tracee. I think there was we did not in Kansas with our partners begin with package delivery at all. What we were looking at real aggressively was the messaging and the things that level of common communication that is missing so much with brand new innovative programs. There's so many moving parts to this one, from everywhere from legislation down to, local policy to, actual law making and rule making and, integrating all the stakeholders required so much common understanding that was just lacking. And it was very difficult to have a conversation. I went and met some of the guys on this panel over at the American Bar Association and had a whole herd of lawyers talking about policy and all that kind of stuff about something that people didn't understand what a drone really was. And it just sounded scary, and it sounded like it was going to be, hovering off my back patio. So having the ability to actually communicate and be actually rather forced because of our agreement with the FAA, and mutually so, wanting to communicate across the entire state made all the difference. It really made our stakeholders eligible to, and available to people who otherwise wouldn't have contact with them. So it's real powerful. That was a big outcome. I think people are all singing one tune now.
Yes, and I'll add that for us, one of the big advantages was giving a little bit of direct exposure to the people in the FAA that could approve these types of things. We started a little bit late into the IPP. We used the Choctaw Nation, Oklahoma site, and we were bringing a larger vehicle, something that was 325 pounds, and just having that, the avenue through the IPP to get the waivers, to get all of the approvals, that was just a huge, they turned something that had been taking us 6 to 9 months into a matter of 2 weeks. And that's a big deal for us when you have a flight test team standing by waiting for the permission slip to go fly.
I think those are all accomplishments. Is there one thing that you've done that has made your team exceptionally effective in participating in the IPP program?
I can take that first. I mean, I can't say enough about our fly trucks team in Israel. You know, coming into this, we don't really know what the FAA is going to throw at us, especially with the type design. So having the ability to be flexible and understand that your pathway that you once saw might not be the pathway to the future. And so our ability to have a very broken down conversation with the FAA at what they expect and what they want to see in the future, and being able to quickly pivot and apply our team to make those changes was absolutely pivotal to our success and our progress in such a short time frame. I mean, we were focused on 107 ops with our initial vehicle for a long time, just to try to get going. And then we quickly realized that wasn't the pathway long term. We needed to focus on the vehicle and get that thing type certified. So our ability to pivot and just listen to the feedback that the FAA was openly giving to us, and not being too stubborn, if you will, on your design was really, really important for us to make the success and to have the success that we've had so quickly.
Yeah, and I would add just a little bit more from what I was just previously talking about. Being able to have that direct connection is, you know, allows for quick adjustments. If the expectation is different on the FAA side or the test sites, you know, it allowed us to react quickly and you know, and get into the air, and that's what's important in development and for the data that we're trying to take and trying to provide to the FAA.
I'll build upon that just a little bit further. I'd even say that, you know, I know a lot of folks that outside of the IPP teams probably don't realize, but, you know, there is like dedicated FAA resources assigned to this. So, you know, we were working with the FAA well before the IPP, and you would build these relationships, and it was great. Like, you could find headway with the FAA and working with the regulator to find solutions to some of these challenges. But the FAA, like I always say, when you deal with the FAA individually, they're really easy to work with. They're just like anybody else, and you get that human interaction and you find a common ground and you try to find a way forward, and everyone wants to achieve the same thing. But the moment you touch big FAA, you know, all bets are off and you run into that brick wall and you don't get anywhere. On the IPP, these dedicated resources have been really given the authority from the FAA to really cross those lines of business and really try to break down those barriers and ask the questions of how do we get to yes. And so, you know, what really I think is a big success contributor beyond just the team members that have all been participating on all nine teams, but I'd say, like, I'd give a round of applause to the FAA for actually, I think, doing something that they are not used to doing or comfortable doing, and that is really giving that freedom for the folks at the FAA to try to chase these things down to really help support industry.
You know, I think if we were going to repeat IPP, one of the things that we would make sure we did not fail to do again would be get everybody in the same room. When we the very beginning, having a little over 200 people in the first meeting, and a bunch of them after that, to where we've got manufacturers, policymakers, legislators, the whole shooting match, all in one room, saying, all right, what are we going to do? And guys from the FAA sitting in the back of the room and actually getting everybody talking. The second thing that we did that I think was effective for us was, you know, we had kind of a mantra that was dance with the one you brung. And that was really, truly just, if you have a specific objective you want to accomplish for your aircraft or sensor or software system, then bring the resources to do it, and make them available to the whole team. And then the team will also coalesce behind those objectives and say, hey, I'm trying to get that objective done as well. What can we do to join forces and get things knocked down one at a time as a group, and really multitask the entire event. And that made resources go farther, and it also made our teamwork so much more robust because we were all coming from the same position.
Sounds like you all utilized the resources that you had pretty effectively, but were there any epic fails that you had during the IPP program?
BV
Let's start
loss.
with that. Oh, go ahead, Wes.
I'm just saying, you know, the BV loss is one of those things that for everybody is a huge challenge because there's not really any technology that's scalable or has been vetted or fleshed out enough to, you know, say it's reliable enough to, you know, do the see and avoid the task, you know. So I think the biggest thing, I don't know if it's a fail, it's just not being able to see around the corner to say, okay, technology isn't really where it needs to be yet. And, you know, I think moving forward, all of the partners in the IPP, you know, when we are in these rooms that Bob is talking about, you know, we're handling the current tasks at hand, but everybody is thinking about this. How do we fly BV loss? And you didn't see very many waivers to that rule get issued. And it's because it is the biggest challenge for sure is how do we mount a technology on these aircraft, or how do we, you know, install technology radar systems that are scalable, cost effective, and, you know, reliable so that we can give the FAA the warm fuzzy that it is actually going to perform the way that it says it is. So
We did not do a good job of failing enough. Quite honestly, I mean, we didn't take enough risks to say, all right, guys, here's your left and right boundary. Go for it. Let's go crash some aircraft so we can learn from it. I mean, we're using $2,000 drones. We really should cover a few of them in dirt just to figure out, are all of our suspicions true, or are we running from fear? You know, and what's really accurate with that, and let's max perform some things in a little bit different direction. And we got started very early with the whole waiver and authorization process, and that kind of, you know, sucked the life out of, you know, an awful lot of the let's go get things done quickly, you know, thought. And so I should have probably steered our team towards, okay, we got the waiver and authorization piece. Let's table that with you 6 guys. The rest of us, stop thinking about that, and let's go expand the envelope and figure out what's really doable. And so that from us, if we were going to do phase 1 over again, which is Wild West, you know, frontier of just getting FAA and all of us to kind of understand each other well enough to be able to say, get to yes, I would have taken more risks and purposely crashed a few airplanes. Drones, unmanned, small, cheap airplane.
Trevor, any fails you want to admit to?
Trying to think of some like good ones, but Bob, you actually brought some really good points on the risk side, and I'd say, like, you know, maybe stemming from that, like I'd say we probably tried to do too much without dialing it in on a very specific ask, you know. So and that's not necessarily unique to the IPP. That's probably a challenge for us generally, is, you know, sometimes in order to make headway with the FAA, you have to have a very specific ask, and you have to, you know, even when you want to do 10 things and those 10 things are all going to come in the next 3 to 6 months, you still need to just start with 1. And a lot of times we'd want to start with 3, but the FAA can't handle that. They need 1, and then they can go to 2, and then they can go to 3. And so I'd say, like, lesson learned, you know, and we really need to start with something very, very, you know, very articulate and build upon that. And I think you get a lot further along, and we probably learned that a little bit too late. We did start to see some headway for us at our team later on in the process, and we're using that for the follow-on efforts. But yeah, I think early on, you know, the FAA was really looking for something that was clearly planned out, very objectively driven, and it was actually a very, very difficult process to get to that stage. But it was also really hard for us to get to that point, because we wanted to accomplish so much. We had a lot of industry partners who all had different interests, and we think they're all very valuable interests, but the FAA just doesn't have the resources to be able to throw at this to boil the ocean.
Trevor and Bob, you streamlined your path through the IPP program. If you could streamline one process to advance UAS usage, which process do you believe would make the biggest impact?
don't know that I have a perfectly good answer to that. I think what we ought to be thinking about is how do we get guys in the air? And truly, that process to be able to communicate in a way that we can say, I want every partner to fly 1,000 hours this month. How are we going to do that? How are we going to deconflict it and do a lot more shots on goal towards one objective and have everybody doing similar attacks on the exact same objective so that we can assimilate the aircraft, or assimilate, we can accumulate enough data to make an informed rulemaking input.
Yeah, streamlining, I think I think one of the things that we've seen out of IPP that has streamlined is this, this durability and reliability as a means of compliance for certification. And it's not, it's not like widely open yet for all the OEMs out there, but it is, we've seen a lot of headway in the last 3 years, but it doesn't stop there. I think, Wes, you said something earlier about like one of the fails is we still don't see BV loss. And, even once we get to certification of the aircraft and we start to have the reliability of the aircraft solved, we still have the operators that, Bob, to your point, we got to get people flying, and you can't just go have a 107 certificate and think that you're going to be flying beyond visual line of sight. I think, to me, this is one of those areas where I'd like to see development get streamlined further would be, what does the operator need to look like from a maturity perspective? It's okay, so I have a 107 certificate, but then, what kind of experience do you need? What kind of training and what kind of qualifications you need? It's the aircraft, it's the airspace, and it's the operator. And, I think we started to see a lot of streamlining on the aircraft side of it, and there's still a lot of work to be done, but we need to start looking into some of these other areas, specifically with operators. Really, for those who have not touched this space, they're starting to see drones as an opportunity for their business. And I agree, like with Bob, you need to get them up in the air. Just go get them a cheap drone and get them flying, because that's really the first step you got to take before you can start building all the maturity processes to go with it.
It took Jay Merkel and Earl Lawrence both were in leadership during this first program, and they did a relatively heroic job of reaching out to all of the lines of business to just get simple things like definitions that were common and that they all agreed with within the FAA. But one of the things we didn't take advantage of that we will in this next round is if beyond line of sight is a specific number of miles, if it's 2.79, depending on whoever you talk to, then how many flights are we doing to 2.78 that are not beyond line of sight, that are legal, but are we expanding that envelope and beating up the envelope that's completely legal without having to cross the line? So I think that'll be an adjustment for this next round.
So this program was fully uncharted territory, and there were a lot of goals set that you may have accomplished several of them, but were there any goals that you set to accomplish that you weren't able to during this first phase of IPP?
About 30. Honestly, there was a lot. Yeah, I think we really did envision BV loss being more conquerable than not. So I really did expect there to be a plastic overcast of aircraft, across the state of Kansas delivering packages and emergency response and and highway inspections and that stuff. I thought we'd be flying 300-mile legs right by now. So that was maybe a little bit aggressive of a schedule, but now lessons learned. So yeah, so far, yeah, we have a handful that we'll continue to pursue.
I think another one of them is the integration with UTM Technologies and remote ID, with those things fleshing out and, not as a company, I mean, we're focused on the hardware and the software solution, obviously with the aircraft, but it would be great if the industry could come up with those technologies. That way it's, scalable and cost effective. If individual companies are developing those technologies and not sharing them with the community and the industry, it doesn't really make sense for the scalability of things. So, I think one of those, not missed opportunities, but maybe for the future is finding those technologies and integrating them to the operations that we have ongoing today. And, trying to grow them and trying to scale them to more advanced operations that Bob was just discussing.
So Trevor talked a little bit about working directly with the FAA efficiently to accomplish some of their goals. But how has working with the FAA to better understand the future of unmanned operations in the NAS, how has it shaped your organization's focus on the future?
Well, I'll kind of start off that part of it was just that communications to kind of give us the insight on what's the future going to look like. I mean, we've already, you know, UTM has sort of been teed up and remote ID. The maturity is not where we need those to be yet. I think the maturity, even at the certification level, is not quite there. But at least these are the discussions, you know, and having that ability to interact with the FAA, to feel like you can influence. If nothing else, you can provide some data that ultimately can influence it. So I think that's one of the things that you know has allowed us to do.
Yeah. Also, going back to what Trevor mentioned about establishing the relationships, you know, working with Aircraft Certification Office and the Part 135 CERT team, it helped us establish the relationships for, you know, what are we presenting to them today? You know, our operator is asking, has petitioned for and asked for a certain number of exemptions, but there are more to come. We have challenges with like swapping batteries, you know, classified as preventative maintenance and requiring an A&P mechanic to do so. I mean, that long term is not acceptable to this industry. So, you know, we're taking those relationships that we've established and having these sidebar conversations to say, okay, I know we've been working on this today, but let's have a conversation about, you know, how do we remove this requirement for example, replacing batteries? What is the pathway to that? Let's have a conversation. What does that exemption look like? What does that maintenance program look like? So, you know, and us for a company, I mean, we're looking to do multiple aircraft and repeat this process. So, you know, IPP1 and is taking our current aircraft configuration and saying, okay, we can do this. We can lift 6.5 pounds. We can't fly in rain. Okay, how do we repeat this with an all-weather drone? We already have these relationships established. We know the processes. We've already, you know, banged our head against a wall for months and months and months on that. Okay, now we know the process. We can copy, paste, edit, and repeat. So I think that is really big for us as a company is understanding the process and the flow of the things, and also who to send the email to when we have a question.
Yeah, I think it's shaped things for us a little bit too, in that, like, I think the barriers we ran up against with the FAA became less safety barriers and more regulatory barriers at the end of the day. I think like one that comes to mind that we had to wrestle through was the use of Part 15 frequencies in controlled airspace when you're trying to do even a demonstrated beyond visual line of sight capability. You know, like that you know, it's a very specific ask, but we found by having that ask that there is a real regulatory challenge that the FAA has that they have to work through. And so I think a lot of the challenges boils down to something like that. The FAA at the end of the day can't approve something unless they have the regulatory mechanism to do it, which really means liability. If there's no regulatory mechanism, then they have liability on the approval. And quite honestly, they just can't accept that like kind of liability pretty much ever. So, you know, I think for us moving forward, we kind of look at it with that lens in mind, that even if I can answer the safety case and I can have a very good safety argument, that may not be the only thing. I may have a regulatory or a liability challenge, and quite honestly, there may not be a solution to that until we get through some sort of rulemaking process or find a way to relieve that process. And you know, those are good and they're bad. They're bad because it prevents us from moving forward on a particular issue right now today. But it's good in that it is highlighting something that the FAA has now realized they have to go tackle something and address a problem that will impact the industry moving forward.
Tracee, are you capturing these questions in the chat?
Yeah, I've seen some of them. So we talked about lessons learned as far as barriers to working with the FAA. Are there any other lessons learned through the IPP program that you find have been the most significant?
Yeah, I think that Trevor touched on it with the restrictions and obstacles from multiple national agencies. I think if we really do start identifying an objective, based, performance-based, getting everyone in the same room. I mean, I always come back to that because it always seems to be, it breaks down all the barriers of conversation about policy. And to ask the experts that are the actual senior decision policymakers, which is, it's awful hard to get them all in one room because they're senior executives that they're doing other things. But to answer those hard questions, like I want to go fly beyond visual line of sight using a frequency and controlled airspace. So where's my FCC guy in that conversation that really should have been a part of that conversation at the very, very beginning? And I think FAA, even they, from their own words, they learned a lot about FAA and how, cross-functional coordination and the communication required to make all of the different parts, and physical federal aviation parts work together to accomplish one synthesized objective is unusual. And I think this really broke some glass at the FAA, and I'm really impressed that they're willing to kind of absorb it and deal with the blowback that it's taken, because it really has opened up conversations where, we hosted conferences in Kansas for guys to come here as FAA folks from different lines of business where they met each other for the very first time. And it was a fantastic opportunity to have hard conversations on the dirt that we were about to fly it in. And so very interesting.
Yeah, I agree that the getting everybody in the same room, we as participants, I personally have pushed the FAA pretty hard, and I know a lot of other participants have as well, and they took it very well. We challenged some of the old school mentalities on, risk mitigation and such. I think, with the announcement of an IPP extension, we're definitely interested in continuing working in another IPP, because I think we've gone through the storming phase, and we know now that, there's certain ways to have conversations collaboratively with the regulations in mind. And we also, as an industry, have a better understanding of what the FAA is up against. They can't just, with a swipe of a pen, grant you authority to do certain things. There's written laws that have to be changed in order to do those things. So I think on both sides of the fence, they know that we want to push the boundaries and do things that are advanced, and we need certain things to be changed. And at the same time, us as industry parties know that there are challenges with doing certain things. So we have to go through the process. We can't just skip to the front of the line.
Wes has a really good point there about, he used the word storming, and that's really what this past 3 years has been, I think, for everybody. Even ourselves coming in, we're a test site. We've had these conversations, but, the FAA has not supported a program like this to date, other than the IPP, like to this level. And it's taken 3 years, I think, for everyone to really kind of understand each other. And I think like we're at a pivotal point here where we can be very productive, I believe. And yeah, this extension of the IPPs, it's going to be, having seen some of the front end work that the FAA is proposing with it, I think it is going to be much more objectively driven. It has going to have a lot more clearly defined goals and objectives that the teams need to be mindful of going into this. It's not just hey, let's agree to have some conversations and see what we can do, which I feel is probably what the last 3 years has been. This next go around, I think, is going to be much more clear in what we're trying to achieve and really work towards solving the beyond visual line of sight challenge.
Yeah, and I think for us, beyond visual line of sight is the biggest hurdle, and that's going to be the biggest focus sort of moving forward. And it's going to be looking at the different technologies for for beyond visual line of sight, and assessing them, and hopefully providing some data to the FAA, to the regulators, so that we can, you know, because we've already had a lot of discussion. That's one of the key missing links that we have. And, you know, it's even for some of the vehicles we have here at Bell, in the App family, you know, we can locally get a permission slip to fly and sort of develop the control laws and how the aircraft, you know, within visual line of sight, make sure it flies right, does the things it wants, auto takeoff, auto land, waypoint following. But really, beyond visual line of sight, that's what, you know, that's the goalpost we've all got to shoot for. And to me, that's what sort of the IPP follow on, if nothing else, that's kind of the egg that needs to get cracked.
We had a question in the chat, and I think indirectly you all have touched on it a bit, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out here to see if anyone has anything to add. How do you envision the FAA utilizing lessons learned during the program to address the regulatory limitations that are blocking BVLOS and other advanced operations?
I can touch upon it first. So I don't know if they were blocking it. They just didn't really know the pathway to enable it until recently. I mean, when we were talking about the bandwidth at the FAA, for example, going through the type certification process, they asked us to just curb BVLOS for now because they need to handle the reliability of the aircraft today and establishing the parameters for that. In the future, the BVLOS system that gets applied to the unmanned system is going to be part of the type certification process. It's not going to be a standalone where you just add it onto your aircraft. It's going to be one whole bucket. So it's your UAS, it's your UTM, it's your remote ID, and it's your BVLOS technology. So being able to handle all of that at once was a really, really heavy burden for this initial phase, because it was, hey, let's lay the groundwork for the, you know, the pieces and parts for the aircraft. Let's talk about the reliability of the aircraft and the different parts, and look at PC, which is production certificate, and also the type certificate. You know, what are your processes for making sure that the quality control is there? And then now let's add this BVLOS technology and prove that it does what it says it's going to do. So that is really where we're at. It wouldn't be blocking it. It's really, you know, how are they going to approach it? And that's where it is it's part of this whole type certification process.
Yeah, and it's not a one size fits all, because these vehicles have different missions. You know, we have one vehicle that will just hover around and, you know, it's low airspeed. We got another one that'll go 110 knots. And depending on the mission and where you're flying, and the beyond visual line of sight system it's going to be different for the different classes of aircraft. And I think so that's just adds more variables that the FAA has to evaluate, and you know, and sort of create some rules around, so that everybody kind of understands the swim lane they're in and what the expectation is.
I think the FAA, I don't know that they would say this out loud, but I don't think they would disagree either, that the rules that have been established, kind of what Carrie was talking about, don't always apply. And even though those are the existing boundaries for manned flight and space flight and all the other, you know, light sport and all the rest of the activities that are out there, they're quantified. When we ask them about drones, we can't just take the, you know, standard blanket of, you know, well, if it, you know, got to be able to see in the void. Yeah. Okay. Well, those are easy things to say. And, you know, but there are other things that just don't apply. And so as we redefine this whole dang, you know, environment, the ecosystem is going to depend on entirely new ways of doing business. And I think the FAA really has embraced the idea that maybe those, you know, straightforward canned answers that we've known for 50 years aren't, maybe need some wiggle room in them. And I think they're learning that.
I look at it like, Wes, you hit I think said something that, you know, like the FAA isn't blocking anything. I agree. I look at this like, when we talk about beyond visual line of sight, we're really like, what's the equivalent is I'm asking the regulator to let me drive across the country on the roadway system. And like the cars aren't even able to leave the neighborhood yet because they don't have a big enough gas tank. The motor can barely run long enough for it. And, you know, we don't have a standard for wheels and widths and everything else that comes along with it. And that's a really good observation. There's so much more barriers that are preventing us from getting across the country, if we were to use this as an example, that we need to solve first. And, you know, Wes, I thought that was interesting that you said, you know, it's like, okay, let's set aside the BV loss here for a moment and discuss these other things. And I think we've had a very similar experience to that as well of you know, yes, that's the end state, but we've got to really break down what it takes to get to that end state and really understand, you know, fundamentally what the challenge is here. And again, looking at it really for us from a regulatory and liability perspective of it, that, you know, Bob, to your point, there's just not enough iterations yet to understand what kind of regulations we need to make this, you know, scalable, repeatable, and economically viable.
Sorry, you guys, I got kicked out there for a minute. So
you're getting coffee.
So we've obviously talked about the fact that there will be another phase of this IPP program. Is there anything you all can add as far as your knowledge of the future of the program?
Well, we've been told that we can talk about it to potential partners and that they have plans, and those plans could be subject to modification, and the idea is to have an agreement in place by the expiration of the current agreements. Our program manager asked us to refrain from saying the name because they're going to have press releases and other things. And it's a 4-year program and seeing what we've seen, I think it's got a good plan in place for continuing the program.
Yeah, I think it's, Bob mentioned it earlier, it's going to focus us, right? So I think we all have these goalposts in mind. We know what we can do today under current regulations. We know the processes for TC and Part 135, but I think you'll see all the partners, including the FAA and the Departments of Transportation, the test sites, all focus on proving out these BV loss technologies. We really need to come together as a industry and identify the technologies that are suitable for different use cases. You know, talk to the communities, talk to the states, like North Dakota is investing, you know, into their infrastructure with their BV loss corridor, things like that. You know, in more places, allow for operators such as Kazi and Flytrex and Zipline to say, okay, let's all leverage this because it works for all of us. It allows us to get going, and it also gives similar characteristics for each partner when they submit to the FAA, so it's familiar to them, and it's not a new technology that they then have to start from square one again and say, okay, explain me the back end, you know, explain how this works and show me the data on it. It's okay, I'm familiar with this. We've seen this before. What other data are you showing me? What other use cases are you showing me? How is it different from the one before? How is it less risky? What does the airspace look like? Is it densely populated? Is it Class G? Is it, you know, a different type of airspace? Because all of those factors are weighed in the enabling of the operations, right? So I think that's what the focus is going to be: is how do we fly in Class G, single aircraft, beyond visual line of sight.
And I think the key to this is all going to be data. We've got to collect the data. We've got to get the data organized in a way, presented in a way that the FAA understands it, can make decisions based on it. And to me, that's one of the biggest items moving into the next phase of IPP, is that we do more than fly. We collect some real world data. You know, there are some other things that Bell's participating in that's not completely IPP, but it's NASA and the FAA in getting into national airspace and Class Bravo airspace. We've got to continue to pull all of this data together, feed it to the FAA, help, you know, you know, set some boundaries of what's in the realm of possible so that we can, you know, that we can flood the skies with these things.
So we just have a couple more minutes left. Are there any additional questions from our attendees, or do you all have anything you'd like to wrap up with? Anything additional that you'd like to add?
I think one of my closing comments I would leave people with is that it's time for the LPs to also give some thought towards how do we unite over the next 4 years and maybe do some cross-functional operations between the different LPs. Some of our stakeholders are in multiple, you know, Flytrex is in multiple IPPs. There's, you know, AirMap is in multiple, IRIS is in multiple. Getting that common baseline to start doing things that are, if we're really going to go beyond line of sight, we ought to be thinking about flying between Kansas and Choctaw Nation and North Dakota and Kansas and that kind of stuff. So a few things, the larger picture, how do we really scale this thing? Yeah, it's getting to be time. So we're really looking forward to doing that.
Yeah, I guess I'll live closing remarks. I'm, you know, grateful to be on this panel. You know, we just announced that we're working with Walmart. We just kicked off an operation, drone delivery operation, as part of the North Carolina IPP in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Did our first delivery last night. So we're pretty excited to have an operation going for COVID in North Dakota, delivering all sorts of food and groceries there, but also here in North Carolina, delivering to backyards and also public drop points. So if you just Google Walmart and drone, it's everywhere. So we're pretty excited. So happy to be announcing it here.
Congratulations to you, Wes, and to Flytrex. Carrie, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So obviously we're, you know, as a user in the user community, we're looking forward to what's next, and especially as some of the maturity of some of these platforms has, you know, we used IPP to mature the vehicle, really not to mature the ecosystem. And I think moving forward, we got to mature the ecosystem, and that's remote ID, beyond visual line of sight, all of these different things. So I think, you know, it's exciting times, and you know, kudos to the FAA and to the Department of Transportation for pulling all of these things together, and looking forward to what's ahead.
All right, I think we're about to get kicked out of here. Thank you all for joining us. If you have additional questions for our panelists, you can reach them through the Pathable app. All of their contact information is there. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in some of the other sessions.
Thanks, Tracee.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.